My name is Toni Young. I'm the Executive Director and Founder of Community Education Group. We'd like to welcome you to our docu-series and our podcast, Black and Red. Black and Red is an opportunity for us to have conversations with individuals who are African American living in Appalachia and also living in the rural South. We're having conversations about COVID, the environment, HIV, viral hepatitis, substance use disorder, political impacts on all the above, and how it is that we live in the region. Thanks again, Community Education Group's Black and Red podcast series. Join us. You can find it on YouTube, and you can also find it at our website. Have a great day. First, I'd like to say hello, and I'd like to welcome Jackie Patterson. So Jackie, first of all, it's been more than 20 years since I think I've seen you. Yeah. And when I knew you, we were doing Frontlines HIV work. Mm-hmm. But now, can you tell us and tell our audience a bit about what it is that you do now and where you do it and who you do it for?
Absolutely. Yes. So it's a joy to reconnect first off. And I am now I'm the founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. And it was born out of the work that I was doing with the NAACP for the last 12 years.
Wait, whoa. You work with the NAACP?
I did.
You did?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And so the NAACP was doing climate change work?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a bit about that too?
Sure, yeah. So I was a founding director of the Environmental and Climate Justice Program at the NAACP. And it really rose out of a recognition that climate change disproportionately affects Black communities, that there are many civil rights issues connected to climate change, and there are ways that African American communities need to be in the lead because we're closest to the problem, and therefore we're best poised to advance solutions that actually work around climate change. And so for the last 12 years, I've been working on everything from political education to with our communities and developing strategy, building power to have more than a seat at the table, but actually be in decision-making spaces around these issues. And then also educating the kind of broader traditional environmental world about what equity and justice should be looking like in this space. And then helping to weave a narrative analysis understanding around intersectionality between environmental justice and issues like HIV and AIDS, gender justice, economic justice, immigration rights, LGBTQ rights, and so forth and so on. So that has been the work of the last 12 years or so.
Cool. And, I guess I'm asking the question or asking you to explain more about it because one of the things that we want to do with the Black and Red Project is really to talk to Black folks in Southern communities, in Appalachia in particular. I think in particularly understanding the role that Black people are playing in these communities in civil rights issues and public health issues and educational attainment issues and in political issues, because I think that they all kind of meet in some really weird place, right? And so the other thing is that I want to know why you decided to name your project the Chisholm Project.
Yeah.
And people don't know, a lot of people may not know who Shirley Chisholm is. I kind of know her because she's one of my heroes. Mm-hmm. But so can you tell us a bit about why you named it what you named it?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the Chisholm Legacy Project was really following in the footsteps of Shirley Chisholm, who was the first African-American woman in Congress, the first African-American and the first woman to run for president of the United States. She really rose up and as someone who was one of the first real advocates for gender justice and climate justice. And racial justice, recognizing that at that time, a lot of women were being encouraged to say, oh, well, the gender justice piece will come. You really need to focus on racial justice. And so that's what a lot of women did. But she unapologetically pushed for gender justice as well as racial justice. And so that was something that I really admired about her and follows my own path around gender justice advocacy. And also I appreciated how she just stood strong in the midst of adversity. So even the African American constituency didn't necessarily come behind her when she ran for president. They went for the other candidate. And yet she persevered in the face of adversity. I appreciate the fact that when you see pictures of her, there's some where she's looking fierce, and then there's equal number where she's smiling. And she was able to find joy and humor. A number of her quotes have an edge of humor to them because that's who she was. And I appreciate it even amidst like all of the opposition that she faced, having press conferences where reporters didn't ask her questions or turn their backs on her, and yet she carried forward. I also appreciated her motto around unbought and unbossed. In our communities, often these industries really are trying to buy our allegiance, and because our communities have been oppressed economically and otherwise for so long, they exploit that vulnerability by trying to buy our allegiance and have us be the instrument of our own destruction. And she really saw that early on and put forward that motto of unbought and unbossed. I also appreciate her other kind of famous quote about if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Like that notion of recognizing that it's critical that we're a part of decision-making spaces. So all of those really is what led to her legacy being the one that we wanted to hold up as we do this.
Well, one of my things is that, some people do or don't know this about me, but whenever I think of Shirley Chisholm, and I always think back to what happened at Seneca Falls, where there was this divide between, white women suffragettes and black women suffragettes, and that divide actually never kind of came back, in my opinion. And I think even in her presidential run, I think we saw a lot of the same things play out.
Right.
So I think that that's an important thing. I always say if we don't know our history, we'll repeat our history. And that's just really true for me in that moment and in her candidacy to see, again, I think you laid it out, right? The gender inequity that was there, the racial inequity that was there, but I think I saw very similar things in what happened and how things played out in Seneca Falls.
That's a good point.
So, I wanted to talk to you today because a part of, again, like I said, we're talking to black folks in rural communities about a number of topics, one of them being certainly COVID-19. And, when I started to think about you, unlike a lot of our other folks, I think that you are sitting at what I think is the crux of how we got to COVID-19. And when I say that, I mean, I don't want to have a debate about the origin of COVID-19. But what I do want to talk to you about or start our conversation about is the impact of globalization and COVID-19. And when I say that, I start thinking about everything from planes, how we transport our materials around the world, ships, planes, cargo ships, that these things have the ability to transport a microorganism, right, in an instant, literally. So can you tell me what your thoughts are about how COVID-19 and globalization interact with each other, or the role of globalization on COVID-19?
Yeah, thank you.
If it's true. I mean, maybe I just made this whole thing up.
No. I mean, I think that definitely globalization plays a role in some of the vessels, and I think that beneath that, what's at the root of globalization is capitalism, and I think that capitalism is a lot at the root in terms of profit really trumping all else. Another quote from Shirley Chisholm is that when basically, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact quote, but it's basically when morality and profit are in conflict, it's seldom that profit loses. And so we saw that with COVID-19, where there was more of a concern about maintaining an economy than maintaining the health and well-being of populace. And we also saw where even now with this morning's announcement that the booster is available for all adults, while we have countries where only 1% of the population even has access to any vaccine at all. And so on March the 9th, when COVID-19 was only really being talked about at that in Kirkland, that Washington State nursing home, I sat down and wrote this and spent 19 hours straight just from watching the news and wrote this document called the 10 Equity Implications of COVID-19.
Wow. Okay.
Because doing this work around climate change, doing the work at the front lines of HIV and AIDS, it was so clear even then what the inequities would turn out to be.
Do you know the 10 off the top of your head?
Wow. No, but I can probably recite some of them. Right. Certainly that we would see xenophobia, and we would see
What's xenophobia?
Oh yeah. So
right.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. That we would see discrimination against people from other nations, and particularly anti-Asian hate and discrimination. That we would see the uptake in other types of discrimination and hate crimes against LGBTQ folks and so forth, because we saw like where some of the kind of extreme Christian folks started to raise those kind of questions, as they do with so many other things. That we would see the people who were, because we saw it in the nursing home, the people who were in confined spaces, whether it's prisons and so forth, that we would see this challenge. And we would definitely see racial discrimination in terms of who would have access to treatment, who would be the essential workers that were going to be in the front lines of impacts. That we would see politicization, and the politicization would actually result in a schism in terms of our ability to address the issues and the extent to which we're addressing the issues. Those were some of the things.
How did you know, though? How did you know that this was the thing, right?
Mostly because, like I said, working on HIV and AIDS, working on climate justice, like the same thing happens pretty much every single time. Like whenever the nation comes in any kind of crisis, those patterns are well-worn patterns of crazy, right.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people. I think. I don't know if you know Phil Wilson, who's the founder of the Black AIDS Institute. Mm-hmm. He always says that when white America gets a cold, Black America gets the flu.
Yes.
And so, I mean, was it kind of like that thought? Like, if this is impacting this small number of kind of folks in Washington in a nursing home today, what are the implications 6 months down the road for Black people in Baltimore or in DC or in Chicago?
Definitely. Yeah, to your point about globalization, that same phrase is used when America gets a cold, then the world gets pneumonia.
Okay.
Yeah, because of the imperialism and its outsized impact on the global economy.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at when you think about this through a global lens, do you see or do you have a network of folks? Because I imagine, I don't know why I imagine this. And, and I think that's the whole kind of purpose of this podcast, is that I talk about the stuff that I think, hopefully other people think it too, or wonder it too. So with what you're doing, do you see globalization, or do you see COVID, or the way America is around COVID, impacting other environmentalists in other countries? What do I mean by that? And what I mean is, you said it, you kind of hit on it a bit, the availability of vaccine, right? So it's like, we have cup runneth over. Please come get your third booster, and if you don't want to take one, don't take one, which is, I think, not sound public health. But we also see around the world that, as you articulated, in some countries, fewer than 1% of folks have been inoculated and have access. So I keep wondering, what's kind of the global implication of that, right? Now that airports are opening back up and travel is free again, well, there's a lot of the world that's still not vaccinated.
Yeah. So a number of different implications. One is, one thing that, again, we've seen with other situations is that even when they were doing the vaccine trials, they were doing them in places like Nigeria and other countries in the global south, countries where once the vaccine actually came online, they, at one of the times when I was when they were rolling it out on mass here, they hadn't gotten one dose for the actual population besides what was used. And so people being used literally without actually having equal access. So that's one thing that we're definitely seeing. Another thing is I just came back from Scotland for the UN climate talks. And a number of the countries that are most impacted by climate change weren't able to come to the COP, the Conference of Parties, because they were on the red list in terms of COVID-19.
Oh, so they're still restricted on travel,
Right?
Because they don't have access to the vaccine, so they can't. As you said earlier, that Ms. Chisholm likes to talk about. You got to be at the table.
Yes, exactly.
So they couldn't get at the table.
Right.
They couldn't even get the folding chair to the
Yes,
table.
yes.
Because they couldn't get to the country.
Right.
Wow. So I guess we don't think about that, right? We don't think about how many, because I guess in the United States, we're right now saying, okay, well, now we can travel wherever we want to. We can go to wherever we want to if we've got the booster. And we can argue that we don't want to wear a mask and that we don't want to get a booster. Now, I mean, you just kind of lay out a level of privilege that I think I just have never thought about, right? I mean, I've thought about it to an extent, but not like on that kind of scale,
Right.
where now I have a country that can't even come to the environmental talks because its population isn't vaccinated enough to participate in a global conversation.
Yep.
Wow. I didn't expect to get there, but we got there kind of quick.
Yeah.
So it's an issue of privilege in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And the ultimate irony there is, once again, the very same countries, some of which were used for the vaccine trials, are the ones that then don't have the vaccine and aren't able to participate. Also, the ones that are most likely to be most impacted by climate change. Then on top of it all, the U.S. is 4% of the global population, yet upwards of 25% of the emissions to drive climate change. And that doesn't even count, that's just the ones that are in our borders. That doesn't even count the fact that our rampant consumerism is responsible for all the emissions so many of the emissions from China, because China is also a huge emitter, but it's because they're manufacturing hand over fist to feed our, rabid consumerism. Yeah. And so, but yet at the same time, we're using those countries as guinea pigs, where because of our pollution, those countries are being ravaged by storms, by sea level rise. They're experiencing shifts in agricultural yields, so they can't even feed their populations. So just so many interconnections.
So you lay out a lot of things. You say, well, we've got globalization that's happening. We've got capitalism occurring. We've got public health kind of distrust and running rampant on a global scale. One of the things that we see now in the United States is the have-nots and the haves. And when I say that, I mean it's not that folks don't have access to vaccine in the United States. They do. It's not that vaccine opportunities aren't available. They are. One of the big questions is the privilege in this country to be able to say no. So, we are, depending on whose math you use, we might be a population of almost 40% of unvaccinated people, right? So if that's a driver for an ongoing challenge to our public health, what do we do? How do we, particularly in those same black folks, right? Because I don't know that black folks are taking on the banner of the environment as their issue either in this country.
Yeah.
And I think that some people see both as issues of privilege. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit about that for me? Like how those things might be like similar in the privilege, what I call the privilege bubble. Mm-hmm. I can afford to care about the environment because I can afford to recycle, right?
Yep. Yeah, so many things there and so many parallels there. One is similar to, like I said, about the vaccine trials and then not having access to vaccine in the global south. Similarly, the vaccine hesitancy is somewhat rooted in the fact that we were subject to these trials as well, and then we see what happened there. And so that kind of the well-earned lack of of trust in the federal government and the state, so to speak, whether it's across borders or within borders, is a well-earned thing, and so that's one dynamic there.
I want to kind of stick with this for a minute, and I have all these other questions to ask you, but we will get to them.
Yes.
Okay, so like one is like here is like how do you believe the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted Black people, right? And so I think this is kind of the what we're talking about here, because I don't think that at this point, and we're filming this and recording this in November of 2021, and I don't believe that folks are at vaccine hesitant at this point. I think people are vaccine no at this point. And I think one of the things that we're doing is really looking at Black people in the South and looking at Black people in Appalachia, because this is, I think, an issue around culture and how people view themselves in our culture. This is why people are at no. Some of this is politically driven. This is not necessarily public health driven. So I don't know what I need to tell people. Help me figure out what I need to tell people to recycle a water bottle. No, recycle a water bottle and to consider vaccination. So what do I need to? Because see, I think that's the same person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's true, and I think that you telling people is important as well. Like versus, so one of the things, even when we talk about, we talk about vaccine trials and we talk about pollution in our communities. Like what we've had is some of the mainstream environmentalists will come in our communities, come in with the messaging that doesn't resonate. And then even as time has gone on, people have gotten a little bit more savvy. And so they'll come into our communities now with a message, and it's the same kind of usury. They'll come in, for example, and there was a time when they were coming in around this big, well-funded campaign around coal-fired power plants. So they come into our communities and they would say, this coal-fired power plant is causing this much asthma, hospitalization. Those people in your church who are rolling around with their COPD, their respirator machines, that's because of the toxins that come from these plants and so forth. So they'll get everybody all, riled up with these statistics, but their metric in terms of like what they're being funded to do is to just get an announced retirement for the coal plant. So they'll tell somebody like, you're losing 40 community members a year because of this coal-fired power plant. And then they will negotiate, then they'll use our communities to then like get the quote unquote bodies on the street and so forth to and those are the terms that they use, to protest and raise the concern. And then they'll negotiate for an announced retirement like 10 years from now for and then they will be able to check the box with their funder to say that they were doing that. Meanwhile, the community's like, wait, what? Like, you said 40 people a day?
Right.
Yeah.
And we still have to live with this for 10 years.
Right, exactly.
So 10 times, right. Okay,
yes,
right. So a lot of people, right.
Yeah, so those kind of things, we see where with some of these pipelines, people will come in and say, oh, this pipeline is bad. It's got this natural gas going through it and so forth. And so we need to do something about it. The community, the reason that it's going through their community is because it's a low-income community, and so they get folks riled up to block it. And then when it's over, they leave. And it's like the reason the community was vulnerable in the first place is because of the low income situation and the lack of political power. How about actually, being invested in seeing this community move towards self-determination and liberation versus just using that community to fight this pipeline that you didn't want to see, go through the community. So these are the kinds of usury that results in that, in that distrust, and it perpetuates this disconnection from like the bigger issue around these issues. And so similarly, we really have to make sure that when we're going into communities talking about COVID-19 vaccination and so forth, we're taxpayers. We paid for, the R&D. We paid for, and we have a right to have health just like everyone else. And that if we don't do this, we're gonna, we can name all the people that we've lost to this disease. And we can name all the people who, because they've taken the vaccine, they're still, surviving, thriving, and going about their lives. Let's figure out how we can make sure our communities are liberated and be free.
So, Jackie, it's been a long time since we've seen each other. And I think the last time you and I were probably in proximity, I was doing work with Community Education Group in D.C., primarily doing HIV, Hep C testing. Working with a population of individuals who were previously incarcerated. And now I do most of my work in Appalachia. I don't think anybody would have seen that coming. I know I certainly didn't. And one of the projects that we're working on now is called We Are Appalachia. And what we're trying to do with that is a couple of things. Is that we're trying to get people to understand what and where and who folks in Appalachia are. Most people don't understand that West Virginia is the only state that's 100% in Appalachia, but there are counties that are the most northern tip, southern tip, eastern and western. But that's upstate New York, that's Alabama, Tennessee, North Carolina. And so what we're trying to do is really create what we're calling the Appalachia Star. And, this conversation around COVID and around the environment certainly brings me to West Virginia and brings me to the West Virginia coal mines, the belief that the coal mines were going to come back open, and come back online. But more importantly, one of the things that we're finding with the project that we're doing, We Are Appalachia, we really can't find a lot of work that's written or published on the culture of Appalachia. For me, this is an issue of culture, not one of race, when I talk about the We Are Appalachia project. And what do I mean by that? The last paper we can really find that writes about Appalachia in a cultural context, right, still talks about this fear that folks in Appalachia have of cultural erasure. It's not this onslaught of people of color running through Appalachia, but more it's the elimination of culture. So I want to talk to you a bit about that in an environmental context, but I also want to talk to you a bit about what are we going to do to retrain folks in this region who are what I call agriculturally based. I think mines are a part of our agricultural system. Farming is a part of our agricultural system. We got black farmers in this region. We got Latin farmers in this region. We got white farmers in this region. We've got people who are third, fourth, and fifth generations in these regions who are not leaving these regions. Their families aren't leaving these regions. And, we've seen that COVID has really shined a light on, I think, what we knew a lot was happening. But I think for me, it shined a light on some of this isn't about race. Some of this is just about region and culture and what we know. Do you see that stuff in the environmental context or in the work that you do?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Certainly, yeah, on a number of levels. One is just taking West Virginia and coal miners in particular. We were at a meeting of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and we're talking about coal and the challenges around coal as it relates to environment. And then the folks, the delegation from the United Mine Workers of America, several of whom were from West Virginia, stood up and said, well, when you talk about coal and you use terms like cold-blooded, which was the name of a report we put out on the perils of coal, then, that's a personal affront for us, not only in terms of just attacking our what's been a way of life for generations for our families, but you're also talking about, as one person said, my mother who has Alzheimer's and lost her husband who was a coal miner and is dependent on the benefits from him being a coal miner for her health care. And so then people just gave like personal stories of account after account. And we talked about how it's, how often the environmental groups will talk about just transition as it relates to shifting away from fossil fuel context.
Wait, what's that mean? Because that's I think every movement has its lingo.
Yes.
So what's that mean? Just transition.
Right. And so often when they talk about it, it's in the context of shifting away from fossil fuel based energy production. And they'll say a just transition is shifting away from fossil fuels and making sure that the workers are, that it's done in a way that's just for the workers. But the operative term there is for the workers, and so other people are often defining what a just transition looks like. So they'll say, well, we'll make sure we'll retrain people or we'll do this and that so they can have another job. But what we decided is that we developed this initiative called the Black Labor Initiative on Just Transition to say we need laborers to decide what justice is. And in that conversation with the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, they were saying, that we can't, can't expect us to just start flipping burgers, or like they were using some examples, and they are also saying, I'm making six figures and my entire family and, and even kind of extended relatives are dependent on my income. And so we really need to be thinking about rethinking what justice looks like and having it being defined by the people who are going to be transitioning from their current work. Go on.
Well, no, I was going to ask a question, and I'm being a bit flippant, but I'm known for that too. Isn't it really an issue of economic justice for the miner? Mm-hmm. Right? Because my and I'm asking it kind of in a flippant manner, but whether I hear it from what you're saying that the Black Trade Union has said, but also again when I think about what we're finding so far in these third, fourth, and fifth generations, that's exactly it, right? Is that the mines provided a very good living. They provided this living for generations. They provided this kind of good living for folks that were white, folks that were black. Black miners did very well also, right? So, but these are white miners too. So where is their economic justice, right? So, when I think about it and when I look at it and the work we're doing now and asking the question of what job do we replace that with? I can't replace that with as someone said, flipping the burger job. But I also look at the region and have to ask myself, why is it that Google, Facebook, Amazon, other large companies didn't come to the region? Well, poor health outcomes, bad broadband, or not enough broadband, road conditions, right? Educational attainment of the groups that you see, the populations that you see. What do you see as the economic remedy, right? So how do we draw in these companies who, again, then I got to come back to you and you're going to tell me those companies have a horrible environmental footprint, right? How do I get these folks back to work? Mm-hmm. How do I get these folks parity? How do I get these folks economic justice? Not just the black folks, but all the folks in the region who are impacted by the what I call the environmental shift in this country. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do we do?
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. That's what we're.
Or as we say, that's the rub.
Right. That is exactly it. There are certainly a lot of jobs in the new energy economy. In some ways, more jobs in the new energy economy and the new economy. The ways of shifting our economy so that it isn't about globalization. It isn't about manufacturing something way over here and then shipping or trucking it across the ocean or even across the country. We're really trying to shift to a new economy that really is rooted in more localism, whether it's local manufacturing, local production, local services, localism. And so that we with that we can even have things that people consider to be radical but are very achievable, like a jobs guarantee, because there's actually more jobs in localism than there are in this kind of decentralized.
Mm-hmm. And so now so you made my head hurt. So I don't understand. What are you saying? You're saying what use it again, help me, because I don't understand all of this. That sounds like you're saying that these jobs are going to come and get rid of the need to have container ships go across the world with products from China or Indonesia or somewhere, and we're going to start building, I hate to say it, we're going to build back better.
That's the shift that we need to make if we really are going to do so in a way that provides a pace for everybody in the economy and in a way that really eliminates the greenhouse gas emissions that are going to make the economy irrelevant, because the planet won't be here to support human life. So we really have to think about some fairly radical shifts, but that don't necessarily affect our quality of life, but actually improve our quality of life if we do it right.
Right, but again, I come back to how am I going to get Joe, whose family used to be a mining family in West Virginia. Now, Joe doesn't have that mining opportunity. I mean, the best bet, there's some fracking that might happen. Maybe somebody works in. I mean, look. I mean, I'm just. I mean, look. We're having an honest conversation here. This isn't, your regular old podcast where I'm gonna be like, "You're right. The environment's right." I'm like, I have families. I got generations of people
Absolutely.
in Appalachia that made money off of those mines. They made a living off of those mines. And they don't have, I got to figure out what to do. How are we going to retrain? How are we going to retool? How are we going to re-educate? How are we going to reinvigorate an economy that is so driven by environmental issues? And I got you telling me, I don't mess up the carbon footprint. Help me.
Yeah.
Help me help the people.
Yes, that's by no stretch of the imagination my message in terms of so that's why we exist as a Chisholm Legacy Project, as in an ACP Environmental Climate Justice Program, because for us it's all about intersectionality, and that's the problem that I talked about before with with some of the mainstream environmentalism, that it's often so myopic and not really taking into account. As Audre Lorde said, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives. Right. And so for us, it's all about like, how do we actually reform our economy in a way that, because this is a problem with the scarcity narrative, that there's only so many jobs, there's only so much this, there's only so much that, when really, the ecosystem was designed divinely with regeneration. Like, it provides everything that we need, and it's really us that have kind of mucked up that relationship, and the bounty of regeneration. And so, and it sounds overwhelming, I think, when we talk about having to shift to a way that follows the patterns of our ecosystem, because we've been going down the wrong path for so long. And so, but it certainly is a better alternative to what we're seeing now in terms of communities burning, communities flooding, communities being wiped away by these disasters, and so forth. So we really have to recognize what the alternative is, and we have to recognize that it is possible to do it differently, and that it doesn't take all of the sacrifices that the dominant narrative makes it sound like. We're going to have to drink warm beer and take cold showers, or but there's ways that we can do it that work, like regenerative design in our buildings, as I said, local manufacturing, so that there is a job for everybody in a community. Certainly generating our energy from clean sources, so much more.
So how do we do that, right? How do we? When I say, I mean, again, I've got Joe, the Appalachian farmer, 4 or 5 generation. Joe may be white, Joe may be black, Joe may be Latin, Joe may be Native American, Joe may be Asian, as the farmer, but 9 times out of 10, Joe has some historic connection to that mine, and those in the mining industry or the farming industry or the agribusiness in some way. So my question is, what do I tell Joe about where that job's coming from?
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of the thing, that it can't be just like changing this one thing for this other thing. Like, it has to be about getting Joe together with John and Jeff and Jethro, all the different people in the community, and saying, okay, like, what are we going to do to ensure that this community, that we have not just jobs, but we have all of the resources that we need for our community. And think about, so when I talked about Spartansburg, that's what they did. They came together as a community. They had visioning, and it included a collective vision, but that saw to the needs of the individuals and the communities. Similarly, with other communities that are starting to do the same thing, the Portland Clean Energy Fund came out of all the stakeholders in Portland coming together and saying, we can't continue doing energy like this. We need jobs for our community. we need community wealth building initiatives. And they put together a piece of legislation that was based on taxation that now is a Portland Clean Energy Fund that's a community design, community run, community decision making about where the money goes, that really provides like an economic base for frontline communities and their families. And so it's not, yeah, so that's all to say, we have to like have Joe in situ, like
Right.
not Joe like, yeah,
in isolation,
right,
right?
exactly.
So, I guess the other piece of this is, we're doing all of this because we're supposed to be talking about COVID, and that's kind of how we got here, right?
Yes.
Is this route of COVID? So I guess that's the question, kind of coming to the end, is what's the role that you've seen COVID play in environmental lives, and how do you think that we can leverage the moment?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I think that there are ways in which we can leverage the moment. How do we do that in an environmental context? How do we do that going forward? How do we do that? How do you see it playing out in your work?
Mm-hmm. One thing that has been a thing about COVID, it's hard, like, 'cause you don't want to use terms like silver lining when you've got hundreds of thousands of people who have passed away and so forth. But one thing that has provided an opportunity, so to speak, is that COVID has forced us to think about how we function in a totally different way. And I mean, it forced us to see that we can continue to survive and even thrive, like, because you see more, people coming together as families in a different way. You've seen the rise of mutual aid. People actually, that's been just a beautiful thing. We've seen how cooperation actually moves us forward better than this kind of individualism that has gotten us to where we are now. So if we can take some of those lessons from COVID, and we can really start to think about like new ways of being as a society in a way that actually centers how we really live up to this notion of all for one and one for all. We can really begin to see that there can be liberty and justice for all if we just structure ourselves in the right way. And I think COVID has given us an opportunity to rethink and explore different ways of being. So it also, I mean, Steve Benjamin, the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, said that the COVID-19 has been like an X-ray exposing the broken bones of American society, because it really has helped folks to kind of understand that there's a pervasive rot at the core in terms of the number of people who are living on the edge. And it has also exposed the fact that there are ways that we can care for each other that doesn't mean that we can't all be well together, if we do it right. And I think it's opened some important conversations in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things for me with COVID that it's really shown is that nothing operates independently, right? And I think that it's really showed me that as you were speaking, the words that kept running through my head over and over and over again were American exceptionalism, right? I mean, I think that, so much of America and American history, American economics, American wealth, American power, American muscle around the globe has been that we're better than everyone else. And I think that, our kind of, however you kind of fall on what our response was, but the fact that we came up with a vaccine, kind of quick in response to this thing, I'm going to take it and go, hey, look, I'm okay with American exceptionalism in that case. I think that my worry are the other outcomes, right? Do we learn our valuable lesson from the moment? Do we learn the lesson of how to have better community resiliency models across the United States where we can put the resources where they need to be. And, again, I think working in a population that's new and different from me, right? When I walk into a lot of rooms and I'm talking about Appalachia, people are going, what? Especially if they've known me. They're like, you're talking about what today? And, but I think that living and working in Appalachia and living and working in a region of the country where I am not the dominant culture by anybody's stretch of the imagination. But what I'm learning more and more is that I actually am a part of that dominant culture. A decade in living in West Virginia, again, nobody would have believed that. But, I have a commitment to bringing resources, to bringing opportunity to West Virginia and to the region. So I think about it in how do we, and I'm asking you a question in this. I know this is a very long question, but I'm asking you, how do we, as folks that operate, Black folks that operate in these red spaces, right? Because we can't just educate us. We can't just do work with us. We've got to figure out strategies where we make, and then you articulated earlier, the community better for all. It's a greater good. And to me, see, that's the true intent of the American exceptionalism, right? That's where it started. That was the thought it was supposed to be. Now it is, and I'm not going to say included everybody, but the plan was that this was supposed to be for the greater good. COVID has shown us that it didn't care who you were. It didn't care how much money you had. It didn't care how smart you were. And on this last round and this last whip around in the Delta variant, it really didn't care where you lived. There was no place to hide in America. So help me tell the folks in Appalachia, Black, white, Latin, old, young, gay, straight, farmer, urban. Help me tell them why they should care about the environment, how it relates to COVID, what we're going to do, and why they should follow you wherever they need to follow you.
Yeah, it kind of comes back to what I was saying in the beginning about being able to predict what would happen in COVID-19, because what's happening with COVID is the same as what's happening with climate, and it's the same as any other kind of shocks to our society. And what the antidote is to all of it is really coming together as people, recognizing our interdependence, as we said, and recognizing that we are stronger together, and that and recognizing that we have to push back against the myth of scarcity and lean into the reality of abundance, and that by coming together, visioning together, developing a strategy for what we want together, we are stronger against whether it's the ravages of the next pandemic, or it is also having a society that actually moves us away from the brink in terms of the proliferation of climate change. Those same ways of how we live together and live in harmony with the earth are the ways that make us be able to not only survive but to thrive.
So I know we have to wrap up soon, but now you kind of landed where we started, or kind of where we had gotten to, and coming on back a little bit. So who are the people we should reach out to say, hey, bring different jobs to this region? Mm-hmm. Hey, we understand that this is a way folks have made a living. We understand that there is some need for coal. There is some need for coal in the region. There's some need for coal in the country. And so there will be some need for some of these jobs, but many of these jobs are going to go away. Who should we be talking to in coalition, in solidarity, about how to do the job retraining, how to do the job replacement for a lot of these folks? Again, and like I say, we're talking Black, brown, white folk. We're talking, old folk, young folk.
It's definitely arguable in terms of any need for coal, so we can agree to differ on that. But the other thing is that one of the things that we are trying to do in town of really institute models of self-determination is to ensure that we don't necessarily want to have someone come and bring jobs, and although that's one thing, but the other thing is a possibility of us actually creating jobs ourselves, like at the local level. Mm-hmm. So thinking about what it is we would like to create. Is it do we want to continue to be a part of the energy workforce of the country, and therefore do we want to establish a solar manufacturing plant or a wind turbine blade manufacturing plant, or
all right, I'm going to ask you a question now. Mm-hmm. And they're going to tell me I got to really stop, but I'm going to ask you a question now. Do people really want to do that? Do people want to sit around and create their own jobs? Do most people want to say, here's the job? Do you want to do it?
I think there's both. And that's why I say we want to make sure that people have options.
Right.
Like, so if they want to do that, then they can. But making sure that again, we practice radical imagination, because people have been so used to doing things one way. Does that mean that they actually want to do it that way? Or if the opportunity was presented to do something different and actually hold the reins, would people be interested? There's some people that will be, and definitely some people that won't be. But we want to make sure that it's on the table, and that we open people's minds to those possibilities if that's what they want to do. But also, certainly there are moneyed interests that would be happy to receive. Like if we say this is what we would love to see happen in our region, then there are people that would be only too glad to invest, Right. And this is where we're trying to also shift our economic system so that there is incentive to invest in local and domestic production and in domestic activities in a different way than we have now, with, as we said in the very beginning, globalization. Right. being an incentive for companies to make as much money as they possibly can by manufacturing overseas, which is why we have China being such a big belcher of the emissions that are driving climate change. Right. So again, just by re-engineering all of that, we can actually think about ways of being able to reduce emissions and create local jobs, local domestic jobs, and in a way that actually all fits together into shifting economy, the energy economy, and the economy in general, in a better, less environmentally impactful way.
Right. Well, Jackie Patterson, it's been 20 years, but it seems like yesterday.
It's true.
Like you said earlier, we don't agree on everything, like I say, but I think that we agree on a lot. But most importantly, I want to thank you for taking the time to share kind of what you're doing in the world and your place in the world with all of us. Because I do, like I said, I think COVID-19 is an environmental issue as well as a public health issue. And from a community education group and the Black and Red team, I'd really like to thank you for taking time to sit down and chat with me and have people learn more about what you do, more about the environmental impact of COVID on the world, and kind of some of the things we can do to do, sounds like radical change.
Thank you. I really appreciate this conversation. It was such a joy, so thank you.